I am a new face on this stage, so if you don't know who I am or we haven't had a chance to meet, that's all right. My name is Josh. I have been here at Movement now for 30 days. Been in Columbus for 30 days. So we have relocated our family just a month ago, sold our house. We were in Northeast Ohio in the Akron area for about 8 years. And now we are here, and I want to tell you a little bit about my story because we're going to be around this next year and tell you a little bit about kind of what our family's up to. So just a little bit about me and my background. So I grew up in West Virginia, and I've only recently been able to start talking about that. So that's been something I've kind of kept under wraps. Just too much bad comes from opening up about that. I grew up in a loving family, had one brother. And I grew up in a lot of Christian environments. I went to private school my whole life, was always going to church, volunteering in the church. But I would say that I didn't really have a love for God. So much of what I knew about God was kind of compartmentalized to those environments. And just as I got older, I was super overactive. I always was busy kind of finding something to do. That kind of expressed itself in camping and in soccer. I had this weird stint where I played a lot of poker. Online, that was weird. And I really got into music, drums specifically. Just this neighbor friend of mine, he was like, we should start a rock band. And we were like, yeah. And he was like, you should learn drums. And I was like, I will. And so I started learning drums. I begged my parents to let me go to this music camp. It was kind of like this Christian music camp where there was going to be concerts in the evening. You kind of signed up for your instrument and you got to hang out with musicians during the day, learn from them. And so I begged them, let me go. And I ended up going to this camp in Nashville. And that was where God really began to introduce himself to me in a whole new way, kind of through music in ways that I guess honestly growing up, I didn't know we were allowed to kind of express ourselves to God in that way, kind of just even the style, and seeing my peers interact with God in a way that he was so much more real and tangible, and that they actually knew him and loved him was something that was really new to me. And wild enough, while I was at this camp, hundreds of miles away from home, I met someone who basically lived in the same town I lived in. And we ended up connecting somehow one evening, and he said, you should come play drums in our youth band. And so I did, because I had nothing else to do. And I wanted to play music. And it was there that I got to meet peers and youth pastor and older people around me who began to expose just God's true love for me and to begin to tangibly just show me that over time. And so I ended up really giving my life to Jesus when I was a senior in high school. Even though I was kind of exposed in all those different ways to God and grew up in a great home, it kind of took me a while to surrender my life over to him in the way that God really wants us to and the way Jesus asked us to. And it didn't take long until God began doing a lot in my life. I began to kind of learn what it was like to hear from God, to see him work in my life, to talk to others about who he was, and to begin to offer some other people clarity and share what he had done in my own life. And many people began to say, Josh, have you ever considered being in ministry? And I was like, man, I've had to go to a Christian school my whole life. I can't imagine having to go to Christian school longer or be in the church full time. It was just really overwhelming. But I kind of wanted to be an engineer. I went and checked out this school, Cedarville, and was saying I was going for engineering, but while I was there, just kind of had this profound invitation that I just felt like God was inviting me to, that you could do engineering, but you should know that this is a real path that you can go down and I will go with you. It wasn't audibly like that, but just kind of that choice, right? These choices we have in life. And I talked with my parents about it. I prayed about it and talked with, my friends and my youth pastor, and felt so much affirmation to walk down that. And so that was 14 years ago, kind of set me on the path I am today, going wherever God would call us to, even if it's Columbus, Ohio. And it's just kind of my heart what I missed growing up in the church. Not even that the church I grew up in was bad, but just my heart is that people would experience the church as family. They would tangibly experience God's love through relationship, and that, often Jesus and even other parts of the Bible will talk about how we're supposed to be a light, that like God actually does something through our lives, that Jesus can be seen and felt and experienced through each of us. And I just like get super excited about that. And that not just someone on a stage, but people every day of the week would be felt expressions of Jesus. I met my wife, Sarah, really early on in that journey. We've been married for 10 years. And so it's a little intimidating because she has been following Jesus a lot longer than me, and she's 5 years older than me. So that's also intimidating. And God really synced up our hearts because we both had a passion for ministry. She originally grew up in Pasadena, Maryland. And so she's a Ravens fan, and, boo. And you know what? My son's really into the Steelers right now. So there's a lot of mess going on in our house. It's crazy. Yeah, so me and my wife, we kind of met through music a little bit and through her family and where I was living in West Virginia. She is just amazing. She was an elementary school teacher, kind of first out of college. She's been a soccer coach, a youth leader. She's been a women's college counselor. Right now, she's a photographer. She's helped me lead a small group. We've done that together. Incredible mom and wife. And so I just can't say enough for her. She's not here at this service, but she'll be here next service. So hopefully if you see someone actually taking care of our 3 kids, that's my wife. So we have 3 kids. We have Silas, Judah, and Haven, 7, 5, and 3. And it's amazing. It's fun getting to be their dad and to do that together. And for the past year, we have been praying about planning a church. And that is kind of where our connection with Movement began, and with Mark. And so we met last year at a conference kind of where some of churches meet together, other pastors, and got to start that conversation about church planning. Mark said, come on down to Movement and see what we're doing. So we visited last August, and we said, thanks, but no thanks. It's great. You guys have something awesome going on. We were up in Akron kind of hoping there would be a pathway to plant a church there. And it's been over this last year that God's made it clearer and clearer that this is the opportunity he has for us. And just to once again kind of step out in faith and see where he's leading us to, what he's already up to. And excited to kind of announce more about what that church plant's going to look like in the next year. We'll kind of announce some more of that this fall. We'll be here at Movement throughout this year, and just excited to connect with you more and to get to share on stage sometimes, to lead a group, and to kind of serve alongside each other. So enough about me. We have been in this series called Summer of Wisdom. This is actually our last week in that series. And so what we've been saying kind of all along, the big idea is that wisdom is the use and the application of knowledge. So wisdom is not just knowing things, but it's also knowing what to do with them. And that's a big part of wisdom as we talk about things like money or our words, or we just talk about like how even to get it. It's not just something we obtain in our head, it's something that actually applies to our life. So can you imagine finding something that's so radically helpful that your head doesn't just get bigger, but it actually changes your life. And so today's gonna be the last week, and what we're gonna explore, kind of the theme that we're gonna dive into today, is parenting. Parenting, yeah. So I have noticed a lot of new parents and young parents, even in just this last month here at Movement. There's probably some people rocking babies out in the lobby right now, or some little ones here in today, and that's great. And at the end of our time today, we're actually Pastor Mark's gonna interview a couple here, the Frasers, and just get a little bit from them. But why don't we talk a little bit about what parenting feels like, and what better place to go than the internet? So here are a few quotes that I found on the internet about parenting from real parents. Okay, here's the first one. Can you put it up there? It says, being a parent is like folding a fitted sheet. No one really knows how. Yeah, okay, here's another one I found. 90% of parenting is just thinking about when you can lie down again. That one's great, yeah, that's great. Here's one. Having children is like living in a frat house. Nobody sleeps, everything's broken, and there's a lot of throwing up. This one's one of my favorites. At bedtime, all children become dehydrated philosophers who need a hug. And this last one, parenthood is the scariest hood you will ever go through. That is right. Parenting is terrifying, okay? It's overwhelming. I know that as a dad of 3. And just in case you are wondering if you're gonna have to tune out for the rest of the message because you don't have kids or you're not really interested in kids, don't worry. There's a lot more to this because even if you aren't a parent today, this idea of wisdom and the use and application of it in our life, there's something important for each of us. And I kind of wrote it down this way. This is why parenting is important to all of us. It's because God has designed you to be in a child-parent relationship with him. That is the way that God structures his relationship with you. He's designed it that way. You were created to be his son, to be his daughter. And we actually see that in 1 John 3. If you have your phone, find it in there. But if you want to use an actual copy of the Bible, which I encourage you to do, there should be one underneath your chair, and you can go to page 774 to find it. But this is what 1 John 3:1 says. It's very simple. It says, "See how very much our Father loves us. For he calls us his children, and that is what we are." See how very much the Father loves us, that we are his children, and that is who we are. That is what each of us needs today, is to recognize the role that God wants to play in our life. And he doesn't set himself up as a parent in our life because he wants to make us feel small or that he just wants to control us. It says it's because of his love. God has designed you for a relationship like this so you could most experience intimacy and love with him like no other relationship can. And I think that even for us as parents, we want to have this great relationship where our kids know the love that we have for them and we are able to guide them in what's best. But God is just on a whole different level because God is a perfect heavenly Father who understands us completely. He loves us thoroughly, and he always knows what is best for us at all times. He's the perfect parent. You could write this down to look it up later, but in Matthew 7, verses 9 through 11, here's just a little bit of another comparison between God as a father and between earthly fathers. It says that parents, if your children were to ask you for a loaf of bread, would you give them a stone instead? Or if they asked for a fish, would you give them a snake? Of course not. So even if you sinful people, even if you broken parents, you know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your heavenly Father give good gifts to those who ask him? How much more? Even us as parents and our brokenness and our inability to do it perfectly, we still want what's good for our kids. How much better is God as a father, as a parent to you? So God has designed you for a relationship like that. And that's kind of the point for all of us today, that whether you're a parent or not a parent, God sees you as his child, a deeply loved son, a deeply loved daughter. And he desires to be real and present in your life. And he sees your life as worth investing in. He has dreams for you. And if you've never understood God in that way, maybe a part of this message isn't just about becoming a better parent, but seeing that God's heart for you is as his son and daughter. And so I kind of want to approach our conversation today, kind of this message on looking at how God parents us. Because maybe you didn't have an example of healthy parenting or even parenting that would be reflective of God. And how he is. We talked about how parenting is hard, it's scary, it's overwhelming. I think that parenting is so anxiety-inducing because if you're a parent, if you'll admit it, you have no idea what you're doing. We have no idea what we're doing, but we don't want to mess it up. We care about it so much, but we're like, I actually don't know the right answer. I'm just guessing. And that's what can be overwhelming. I remember there was a season in my life where I was going to counseling and it was very helpful. And one of the things that I kind of took out of counseling was recognizing that there was woundedness, right, from my past. And maybe I heard of a childhood wound. And you begin to identify some of those traumas or crises in life. And you're like, that's really helpful to know that sometimes my past still affects my present. And while I was getting all this good help out of counseling, I began to think as a dad, like, oh no. My kid's gonna have wounds because of how I parent them? It's like, yes, absolutely. Every parent has let down their kid at one point or another, probably multiple times. We just fail to perfectly love our kids. And that's a part of the stress of parenting. We don't know what to do, but we love our kids so much, we desperately want to get it right. Where can we go? Who can we actually or trust, or what can we actually lean into that we know will be effective, that we know is healthy, that we know is trustworthy and good, not just for us as parents, but also for our kids. And so that's where we go and lean into God and lean into the Bible, and we find wisdom. We find an effective and healthy way to approach parenting. So here's what I would encourage us to do today. Wise parenting, this is just a little phrase I wrote down, but wise parenting will adopt God's goal and practices for parenting his children. The goal and the practices. That's what we're going to unpack today. If you want to learn to be a great parent, or if you just want to even more step into the kind of relationship that God wants to have in your life, the way he wants to speak into you and work through you. That's exactly what we're going to examine. What is God's goal in parenting? Like what's he aiming at? What's everything that he's doing moving toward? And then how does he go about it? And so that's what we're going to look at today, because God's parenting, the reason it's so trustworthy is it's timeless. No one has more experience doing that than Jesus. No one knows than God. Look at his son, Jesus, right? He's the only example of effective parenting. You look at what God, how he knows the human heart, and how he wants to see us grow into who we were created to be. He has good intentions. And so this is what God's goal is. I wrote down that God's goal is to form hearts of love and lives of obedience. That's what his goal is for you. Being his child, he wants to shape your heart, and he wants to see that be displayed through your life as well. He wants to shape the heart, and he wants to form a life of obedience, following through in what he says is good, like what he's intended for you. And so God is not a resigned or uninterested parent. He thinks about your life. He knows you through and through, same way a parent would try to know the heart of their kid. And his intention is to shape you and to mature you. And so if that's what God's goal is that what our goal is as a parent? Is our goal with our kids to help them form hearts of love and lives of obedience? Because it's really easy to come up with another goal, like their happiness, or even if they would just stop screaming. I mean, like the goal can so easily move, whether that's academics or sports or friends or happiness or opportunities, that they may get that thing, and we kind of craft everything in their life toward that goal. If happiness is the goal, let's take that for example, it's really easy to feel like a failure as a parent when your kids aren't happy. And we know that there are definitely going to be things as we raise them that aren't going to make them happy. But if happiness isn't the goal, or even just always feeling good, let's just say it that way, and the goal is to help them form a heart of love, a life of obedience, we can know that even when our kids aren't happy, if we're working toward that goal, if that's what we're trying to shape in them, we know it's the right thing. But we have to be willing to embrace the goal that God has for us. And I think what that does in our kids is it helps them become familiar with God, right? As we begin to parent them in that way toward that goal, and we start to introduce them to who Jesus is, they start to be like, I think God is going to do the same thing in my life that my parents did. My son all the time, he says, he said this yesterday, he's like, why do you have to be so demanding of me? And I'm like, I was just asking you to do something. Like that's what a parent does. Like I'm going to ask you to go shut the car door. He's like, I don't want you to be demanding. He's going to learn like that's the role God plays in our life. Not that he's demanding, but he asks us to do things. Not because he's controlling, but because he wants to work alongside you and he wants to work through your life. And so the more you get to introduce your kids to that goal, to that end, the more they become familiar with who God is and what he wants in their life. And so we're going to look at the practices. If that's the goal, what does God do to actually shape us toward that goal? Like what can we bank on that will work, or at least is the best approach to take? And I want us to kind of unpack why it's an effective tool, these two tools we're going to look at, and how God uses it in our own life, and kind of push that into even getting into the weeds a little bit of like what you might do as a parent. Because if you didn't grow up with a healthy example of that, that can create even more fear of acting on the kinds of things that are healthy and appropriate and that will guide your kids toward life, toward that goal that God has for them. So here's the first practice for us to look at. The first one is just simply discipline. This is we're going to cover the hard one first. So discipline is a tool that God uses in our life. Proverbs 29, 15, and 17. It's on page 329 if you want to look at it, but I will read it for you. It says that to discipline a child produces wisdom. Discipline produces wisdom, but a mother is disgraced by an undisciplined child. And then in verse 17, it says, discipline your children, and they will give you peace of mind and will make your heart glad. Discipline is not fun. It's not fun to do it. It's not fun to receive it. But there's this part of the Proverbs that are saying this actually leads to good. It gives you peace of mind. It makes your heart glad. And an undisciplined child will make your heart heavy. And discipline often will carry along a connotation of maybe there being physical correction. But that's actually not primarily what's at the root of it. In all the other forms that discipline takes shape in the Bible and that we see God discipline us, it involves words. It involves talking, correcting, maybe an unfamiliar word, rebuking. It means teaching between what's good and what's wrong. That's what's at the heart of discipline, is being able to draw a line and to be able to guide and say, hey, that's not best. That's not good. And discipline is set to help train someone in the familiarity of what is good and what is not. The reason the tool of discipline is so important to implement is because maturity is a process, not an event, right? Like we do not mature instantly. We need time, we need repetition, and we need to help our kids over and over again discern between what is good and what is bad. It's really easy to think that, man, won't they just grow out of this? Like, isn't maybe this just a phase? And will eventually they move on from it? I read a quote that said, kids don't grow out of anything except their clothes, which I've learned is true. If your kids don't learn to control their attitudes and actions now, there can be more serious implications later in life. This is the idea of training. Another proverb shows us in Proverbs 22, if you train up a child in the way they should go, even when they are old, they won't depart from it. If something becomes familiar over time, the 18 years that you have to raise them, it affects them, it guides them. They tend to walk more in that direction than away from it. And this is what God does in us. He trains us. He repeats that work in us because he knows we're not going to mature on accident. It says in Hebrews 12, this is another verse to mark down and look at later, But it says, don't make light of the Lord's discipline. Don't give up when he corrects you, because the Lord disciplines those who he loves. There it is again. The reason God disciplines us is love. He wants you to know what's good. He wants you to know how to pursue it and how to find it. It says too, who ever heard of a child who was never disciplined by their father? Since we respected our earthly fathers who disciplined us, shouldn't we submit even more to the discipline of the Father of our spirits and live forever? For our earthly fathers disciplined us for a few years, doing the best they knew how, didn't we all? But God's discipline is always good for us. No discipline is enjoyable while it's happening. It's painful. But afterwards, there will be a peaceful harvest of right living for those who are trained in this way. See, here we have the author of Hebrews is acknowledging that discipline is difficult, it's not fun, but don't see that as a bad thing. See it as a good thing. Of course, my 8-year-old doesn't want me to be demanding of him, to ask him to do things. Of course, no one likes being corrected and being told, hey, that's wrong. But what it leads to is better. So here's what you can do with your kids. More than just nitpicking every part of their life, I think what's helpful to do is to identify the repeated patterned behaviors that you know they're unhealthy now and they're going to lead toward unhealthy relationships in the future. What's the patterned issues that you see coming up? The one that we're dealing with right now, maybe this is like too real time, but like controlling your emotions. I've got 2 boys and a little girl, and all of them are 7 and under. And man, we have a hard time controlling emotions in our house. And that's not just because I don't want crying to happen or because it's uncomfortable or annoying. It's because sometimes when their emotions aren't under control, they make bad decisions, like maybe hitting your sibling in the face. Definitely don't think that that's good. And thinking about where this will lead them in the future if they don't learn how to control their emotions now. Sometimes I'll use an example. I'll be talking to one of my kids and I'll be like, what do you think would happen if I screamed at my boss like that? What do you think would happen if I, punched someone who I knew in the face? This is going to have consequences, and you have the opportunity now in kind of the safety of your home for me to say, hey, don't do that. That's not going to be helpful. It's going to lead to some bad places if you don't learn how to get this under control. But all they know is their emotions and allowing that to drive them. My wife has this great thing she says when our kids are getting like super frustrated and angry. She'll be like, hey, you're allowed to feel upset. You're allowed to be sad. You're allowed to be mad, but you're not allowed to hit. You're not allowed to disrespect. You're allowed to feel that way, but you're not allowed to act in response that way. This is what God does when he corrects us. He allows us to feel it, but he really wants to say, hey, what is that doing in you? Sometimes it requires kind of a private conversation. I think that sometimes it's just too much in the moment to be able to fully redirect. Sometimes it's easy to just give a look or a little reminder, you sure you want to be doing that? But there are times I kind of have to have a longer conversation with one of my kids. The other day, we were hanging out with some new friends who are actually going to be living near us and don't really know what they know about Jesus or if they have a church. And so kind of my hope is maybe we're in their life to at least be that to them. And so we were getting ice cream with them and our kids were just awful. Like that would have been to like film that and be like what not to do or like, hey, this is like bad behavior for kids. They would have been a perfect example of that. And couldn't really deal with it in the moment. Tried to tell them to sit down, tried to tell them not, repeat. And finally we got home and I actually had our oldest, I had him stay up and I say, hey, I want to talk to you for a minute. Do you know why we're here in Columbus? And he goes, oh, we're here to plant a church. And it's like, yeah, but we're also here to tell people about Jesus. You're here to help us tell people about Jesus. And we were trying to develop a relationship with someone tonight, and you were a distraction to that. You were a distraction to that mission. Do you want to help us in that mission, or do you want to get in the way of it? I don't want to get in the way of it. Okay, next time we have an opportunity like that, it'd be really helpful if you wouldn't be a distraction. I was able to be a little bit cooler when I talked about it. There's all sorts of ways just trying to give them a new opportunity to create a new pattern. If the first step is to identify the pattern that's unhealthy and to begin to correct it, the next step is to just repeat and create a new pattern day by day, week by week, month by month. Sometimes that's when your kids are interrupting you like crazy, mom, 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 and saying, hey, how about we just say, excuse me, mom, and maybe like put your hand on their arm. That way we know you're there and we know you need our attention. It's funny talking about my son saying we are demanding of him. My kids will often say things like, I want a blank or give me a blank. And I'm like, how about we ask it, please give me this, or can I have? Over and over again, things like that. Hey, we don't take things out of people's hands, we ask for them. And you have to do that so many times. I think it's funny because that's what God does in our lives. I brought with me today just something, I don't know how I kept this out in the move, but this is just a stack of different journals and notes I have over the last 10 years as I've been hearing different messages or I go on retreats or read something in a book. And I have all these different journals and all these different notes. And what's funny is if you go back and look in them, you'll start to see repeated patterns. You'll start to see things that God's shown you once, shown you twice, shown you 50 times. You're like, why haven't I still learned that? It's because we're a lot more like our kids than we like to admit. We need repetition. We need to be taught and trained in the same things over and over and over again. That's the first tool. Here's the second one. It's grace. It's grace. I'd encourage you to check out those scriptures later, Hebrews 4:15 through 16 and 2 Corinthians 1:12, because it talks about the importance of God's grace in our own lives. What grace is that even in our weaknesses and bad choices, God does not abandon us. Even in our weaknesses, even in our worst moments and our failures, God does not abandon us. That is what grace is. So your kids actually need the same thing that you need, and it's grace. If you've tried to parent for any time, you know that it's incredibly difficult to hide your weaknesses from your kids. They know how to push your buttons. You can't hide your mistakes. And God doesn't ask you to. When God calls you to be a parent, he's not calling you to have it all together or to have all the answers. This is what's so freeing as a parent is that God knows you. And even while you are called to the task of parenting kids, he is still a parent to you, and he knows that you need grace. Grace is not the same thing as letting something slide. It's actually an active thing. I will read to you the Hebrews 4 verses 15 and 16. It says, Jesus is a high priest of ours who understands our weaknesses. He faced all the same testings that we do, yet he did not sin. So let us come boldly to the throne of grace with God, because there we can receive mercy. There we can find grace to help us when we need it most. So what grace is for is when your life is messy, not when it's put together. The other day we were at a 4th of July cookout, and Jeremy's wife, Krista, had their little 1-year-old, and she was eating watermelon, but she was kind of eating it on Krista because she was just covered in watermelon, and it was just a mess. And I remember she's just sitting there, and she's like, this is fine. This is what parenting is. I'm just covered in watermelon right now. And that's exactly what God is like. He's like, you're messy. That's okay. That's why I'm here. Come be on my lap when you're still covered in watermelon. I have grace. You can be here. And it's all because of Jesus. It's all because he's invited us into that parent-child relationship with him that we get to boldly, as it says, enter in with watermelon-covered faces to God. He can handle the mess. He invites you while you're still messy. So here are 3 ways that I think that tool of grace shows up in our kids' life. The first one is forgiveness. This was the most liberating thing for me as a parent who often makes mistakes. You have the opportunity to show Jesus to your kids 24/7. And that does not mean being a perfect example. There are times where I am doing great and I get to model Jesus to my kid, and I love to talk more about those good times where I'm like, I was a great parent, than I do about the failures. But when those failures happen, I still have an opportunity to model Jesus to my kids, and it's through forgiveness. This is a tool that not a lot of parents have used, but it's a part of grace. To actually go to your 5-year-old and say, I was wrong. I misunderstood the situation. I thought you were doing this and you weren't. I'm sorry for overreacting. Hey, buddy, when I yelled at you because you weren't going to the table, that was the wrong way for me to talk about it. Even though what I was asking you was the right thing to do, the way I talked to you wasn't the way you should be talked to. You deserve more respect. Being able to give yourself enough grace because God gives that to you, to model that to your kids through forgiveness, to teach them what it's like to ask forgiveness from their siblings, from their friends, from you. That you would model it for them. You would model what to do with failure and conflict and mess. Another thing is just reminding them who they are and that they're loved. This is what God does, right? You're his son. He deeply loves you. Over and over again, as he talks about that role in your life, he talks about how he loves you. Something that I do with my kids before bed is just kind of become the rhythm is as I'm putting them into bed, I will ask them questions and they have these answers they're supposed to give back to me. It's just 4 questions. And I say, who loves you most? And they say, Jesus. And I say, who loves you next? They say, Mom and Dad. And then I say, why do we love you? And if it's my boys, they say, because I'm your son. If it's my daughter, they say, because I'm your daughter. And the last question I ask them is I say, how long will you be my son? Or how long will you be my daughter? And their answer is always. And the last thing I say before I walk out of the bedroom is, you will always be my son. You will always be my daughter. It's something I picked up on, and I wanted to become a routine in my kids' life to remind them that God loves them most and that I love them next. And it's because they're my child. And that will never change. Because that is what's true of how God sees us, is we will always belong to him. It's secure. We will always be loved. Couldn't be more, couldn't be less. And the chances you get to point your kids back to God's love and to your love for them, especially when they fail, is so important. And the last part of grace that is a really helpful tool is encouraging. Some of you guys are really good at this. You're great at encouragement. The word encouragement actually means to come alongside. It's another word for saying alongsiding. And that's exactly what parenting is you are always around them, especially when they're little. They are attached to you. They are with watermelon faces grabbing your legs, and they are alongside you. And encouragement is a grace. Because in the mess of life, when you see the good, you see the growth, you get to speak into it. For every time you correct them, there should be 10 other well dones. Because your kids are likely going to grow into what you believe of them. And so that's a part of grace too, is seeing where they are going and the abilities and skills and heart and personality that they have right now. So take a deep breath, parents especially. This is not all the ways to get it right. This is a reflection on how God disciplines us and graces us in our own life. And as we become more familiar with that and we invite him in, it reshapes our parenting. It empowers our parenting. So here's what I would ask for all of us is this question: are you inviting God to parent you? Are you inviting God to parent you? Because that's where it all begins. And even if you don't have kids, that's what he wants. He will discipline you. He will help correct and guide and shape toward good. He wants what's best for you. And he wants to pour out grace for you as well. He wants to offer forgiveness. He wants to remind you that you're loved and you belong. He wants to encourage you and say, this is what I dream for your life. This is what I see you becoming. And so, are we inviting God to parent us? Do we desire to have hearts of love and lives of obedience? If you're a parent today, let me give you a little bit of urgency. Veteran parents will say things like, it goes by so fast, right? Anytime I'm with my little kids, like someone older will come up and be like, it's gonna go so quick. And I'm like, I hope it does. It's like, holy cow. You have about 936 weeks from the day they're born to the day they graduate. 936 weeks. If that doesn't freak you out, researchers say that about 94% of all in-person time with your kids will be done the first 18 years of their life. 94% of all in-person time happens in the first 18 years of life. The other 6 are spread out over the next 50 years. If you are a parent, this time matters. It's important. Not that you get it right, but that every day and every week matters, and God is with you in it. Some helpful resources that I found, you can throw these up there. There's an app called ParentCue. Wouldn't you know, it syncs up with actually what your kids are learning this weekend in their different classrooms. So ParentCue is cool because it'll tell you what they're learning, but also it'll give you a countdown for how many weeks are left with your kids. So that could either be really depressing or really encouraging. But it's got this little countdown on there for how many weeks are remaining. The ParentCue group, the Think Orange group, they actually have these Facebooks. I encourage you to check them out. And there's a couple other authors that have been really helpful to me and Sarah. Paul Tripp's parenting book, and then Raising Passionate Jesus Followers by the Comers. I'm gonna pray for us and hopefully invite some space for us to keep inviting God into our hearts and lives. And I know Pastor Mark's gonna be doing this interview, so let me pray. Father, thank you that you don't call us to do something that you don't equip us for. And that when you call us to the difficult, complex role of being a parent, you remind us that we first belong to you. So would you help us to invite you more into our lives, to do the hard work of discipline, for us to receive the grace you want to give. And wherever we're at, God, maybe we're afraid to let you in, or we feel too much shame or regret in parenting, God. Would you speak into our hearts the way we need you today? And I pray this in Jesus' name, amen.